Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our student panel on Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders abroad. My name is Amanda Chung, and I am the Intake Advisor and Peer Program Coordinator at Berkeley Study Abroad, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel. Now for our lovely panelists, could you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, everybody. My name is Corey Kumamoto. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a fourth year majoring in psychology and minoring in Asian American and Asian diaspora studies. I'm also peer advisor at the Study Abroad office, and in the past, I studied abroad in London in fall 2017 and then Sydney, Australia in summer 2019.
Hi, y'all. My name is Ramil Mercado. I use he, him, his pronouns. I graduated in fall 2019, and my majors were political science and Asian studies with a focus on China, and my minor was Southeast Asian studies with a focus on insular Southeast Asia. And I studied abroad in London, Hong Kong, Singapore, Manila, and Buenos Aires.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex and I'm a business major and I studied abroad in London and Hong Kong.
Hi guys, thanks for coming and zooming in today. I'm Gabby, she, her, hers. I'm a third year ethnic studies major and I studied in London.
Hi, my name's Nicole, and I also go by she, her, hers. My major is Korean literature and culture, and my minor is film and media studies, and I studied abroad in South Korea.
Thanks, everyone. So before we get started with our panel, I wanted to review a few reasons why you might want to study abroad. Now, keep in mind, these are just a few, and there are much more. For one, there's a lot of opportunity for personal growth when you study abroad. There's also opportunity to learn a new language. Perhaps you want to visit the community your family immigrated from. Study abroad is also a great career development opportunity. It can also help you clarify your own interests and goals. Today, we'll be touching a little bit upon that identity piece. Identity is something that follows you wherever you go and feeds into all aspects of your life, to how others perceive you, the food you eat, the music you listen to, etc. And when it comes to identity, there are a few things you might want to consider and think about before you go abroad as an AAPI student. So if you are planning to study abroad outside of Asia and the Pacific Island countries, you may be the first API person or one of the few that a local has ever met. And because of that, they may have preconceived stereotypes of you based on what they may have seen through media. And you may also get that well-known question, but where are you really from? If you say that you are visiting from the United States. Within Asia and the Pacific Island countries, locals may not see you as American at first glance because you may look like them, while others may identify you right away as American based off of the clothes that you're wearing or maybe by hearing you speak. They may also expect you to be fluent in the local language, and you may still get that question of, but where are you really from? So let's get into our panel. Our first question is for Corey and Ramil. How is your race and ethnic group perceived in your host country, and what kinds of stereotypes are there?
Thanks, Amanda. So I can go ahead and get us started on this question. So just for like some personal context, I do identify as half Chinese American and half Japanese American, and I was born in the United States. But with regards to my two study abroad experiences, I had very different experiences with like my identity. So first in London and Europe in general, I faced a lot of stereotyping, and this was my first study abroad experience, so I really wasn't expecting it. I hadn't done a lot of research on it, so it was really shocking when I was in London, people would just come up to me and like say ni hao. I don't even speak Mandarin or Cantonese. And when I spoke English to my friends, people were often really surprised that I spoke English, and that I sounded so American as well. Um, and when I tried to explain that I identified as Asian American and I was born in the United States and from the United States, they again asked me that question, but where are you really from? When they're really just trying to ask me for my ethnicity. So yeah, I faced a lot of negative stereotyping. I felt like it was pretty difficult just because I did not expect it. And when I went to Sydney, I was expecting the same type of stereotypes from the locals there, but it was actually very different. In Sydney, Australia, like I wasn't stereotyped at all, and there's actually really big Asian communities over there. Um, and looking back on it, I also should have done more research because they are located very close to a lot of like Asian and Pacific Island countries. So they were a lot more accepting, I guess, of like my identity, and like they weren't so surprised that like if I spoke English or like appeared more westernized and whatnot. But yeah, so that was my experience. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Ramil.
Okay. Thank you, Corey. So I had drastically different experiences in all the countries that I studied in, but for this meeting, I'll specifically focus on Singapore, the Philippines, and Argentina. So for my time in Singapore, I wouldn't say that it was really difficult to navigate culturally, as they have people from like literally all over the world, and the country is very mixed, ethnically, culturally, etc. But I will say that at times I would hear pretty classist remarks about people from the Philippines or Indonesia. And I think that this stems from the fact that there are many overseas workers in Singapore from these two countries specifically. For example, there's this mall that serves a Filipino community called Lucky Plaza. And when I told Singaporeans that I went, I would hear things like, oh, Lucky Plaza? You went to that mall? But overall, I think that people were more curious by the fact that I spoke English with a very American accent, like Corey was talking about. And so I had more conversations with people in regards to me being an American of Filipino descent over many other things. As for the Philippines, I never really felt alienated during my time there, but that's because I felt the most comfortable there culturally. So I will say that there is a benefit to studying in your country of heritage. You have more time to dive into what makes you connected to the country, and you also have a lot of time to see what traits that you personally have that are very, well, Filipino American in my case. And finally, Argentina. So my time in Argentina was probably the most challenging for me because I don't really fit the image of what a typical Argentinian looks like. So I faced quite a few microaggressions, such as in public spaces. Sometimes people would assume that I didn't speak Spanish, which is not true. I'm half Latino myself, and I do speak Spanish. And so when they would talk about me, they would refer to me as El Asiateco, the Asian, or Chinito, like just simply Chinese. And they would do it when I'm within earshot. And people would even pull their eyes back when they referred to me, not thinking that I would notice, and not thinking that it would be particularly offensive. So as you can imagine, there were days that I was definitely really frustrated in Buenos Aires. However, there's something to be said about introducing other people from the other side of the world to my culture. I had many people ask me questions about the Philippines, such as questions about food, culture, the language, etc. Because I was literally the first Filipino that they ever spoke to, and they were really excited about it. Taxi drivers, for example, they asked me a billion questions about it, and I can just see that they were happy to talk about it, to ask about the Philippines. So I was really happy to educate them and dispel myths about the Philippines and Asia as a whole. Some of those connections that I made out there through these conversations were some of the strongest friendships that I have today. And so I also argue that there's a lot of value in studying outside of Asia as well. You really learn a lot. Thank you.
Thank you both. I think you both made some really good points, and your experience can really vary depending on where you go in the world. Our next question is for Alex, Gabby, and Nicole. What is one thing you wish you had known about studying abroad before you participated in your program?
So I can start, and actually I think my answer is a bit related to what Corey and Ramil were talking about earlier. Something I wish that I did before going abroad was just think about how I would respond to those questions of like but where are you really from? Like, what's your ethnicity? I faced those questions both in London and Hong Kong. So in London, I felt like people were seeing me as Asian first rather than American first. In Hong Kong, I do look kind of like one of the locals, but I'm actually Korean. So I didn't really have that much knowledge about the language or the culture in Hong Kong. But people there thought that I was Asian first as well and American second. So when people were asking me that question, like, but where are you really from? The first couple times I kind of froze. I didn't really know what to say. And it was also really different because people had different intentions when asking that question. Some people really did want to learn more about where you were from. Some people did not have as great intentions in asking that question. So I think just being able to reflect on that and know that like race is not seen the same way in different countries would have better prepared me mentally to take on those challenges.
Yeah, for me, I went to London also, and I think what I wish I would have known before participating in my program was just understanding how significant my relationship to London was going to be for my overall experience, and how the main thing I learned was to live as a local but enjoy like a tourist. So basically immersing yourself into the culture, the people, the lifestyle, finding ways to make London home was kind of difficult for me at first, but when I found different communities throughout London, I was able to feel kind of like I was at home. So one of the things I did was join some of their student programs. For instance, I got to play on University College of London's women's basketball team, and that created a lot of community for me, made me feel like I was low-key a Londoner. Like I felt like I was a part of, I felt a little bit nationalistic even at times. I felt very a part of where I was. And also I was able to join the UCL Filipino Society. And so um, being able to be with people who are from the same culture made me feel like home. They spoke my language. They ate the same food that I did. And one of the things I got to do was teach Ilocano and Tagalog, which are two dialects, Filipino dialects, and that connected me more to the people within London, making me feel kind of a little bit more at home, more than I would have felt like if I had just kind of neglected all of the immersing myself into the culture. So I think just understanding how important your relationship is to the actual country and what the country has to offer is something that I wish I could have considered, or I considered before I went.
In my case, for studying abroad in South Korea, because Koreans and locals there believed I was Korean, even though I'm not, and I'm not fluent in Korean, I felt like a really strong need to try and fit in and view things as a local. And I guess I really wish that before I studied abroad, I knew that there are a lot of people who are in the same situation as me and that feel like really nervous and anxious about studying abroad in an Asian country when you are perceived as that ethnicity. And I think if I had known that, I would have reached out to other people more and it would have helped me get out of my shell faster. Because I do think that studying abroad, it's really great to have a balance between local friends and people who are also in the same situation as you, who are studying abroad and maybe going out of their home country for the first time, because it really helps you develop deeper connections. And sometimes you just get homesick and you want people who are also American or also Filipino or also Chinese, just to have that sense of home and sense of belonging. And I think it's really good to have that balance.
Thank you all so much. Those are some really great tips and insights. So our last question before we get into our Q&A is actually for all the panelists. What advice do you have for people in the AAPI community who are considering going abroad?
Yeah, I could go ahead and start. To tell you the truth, no matter where you're from, no matter what type of education you have, things like that, you're going to be entering a whole new world. So it's going to be an opportunity for you to learn so much about yourself and what you want to pursue in life. I think as long as you allow yourself to fully experience each moment as they come. So don't come into anything new with expectations, positive or negative, because then you'll start to categorize these experiences, places, and people as either good or bad. But there are going to be some struggles, of course, internal and external conflicts. It could be homesickness, cockroaches in your flat, or an existential crisis, which is all the things that I experienced going abroad. But each of these experiences taught me so much more about myself and what I wanted in life and how I was going to fulfill my dreams, basically. So I think that I wish someone had told me to enter a new space with an open heart and mind. And that would have relieved a lot of unnecessary stress that I put myself in when I was abroad.
I can go next. Yeah, I totally agree with like that with what Gabby was saying, like go into things with an open mind and open heart. And I also really recommend, doing a lot of research on the country that you are either planning on going to or that you already applied to. Like I said earlier, I didn't do a lot of research and I was really shocked when I faced like a lot of those stereotypes. Um, you can actually find a lot of resources online. Like if you Google like AAPI experiences abroad, like in a certain country, you can find like, some past experiences of AAPI students who have gone abroad. And, I feel like if I had done more research before I left, and like understood that different countries have different perceptions of race and ethnicity, I could have avoided a lot of negative energy on my end, because when I faced those stereotypes, I got really angry. I also didn't really understand, so if I had done research, I would have probably avoided a lot of that negative energy. And I would have been able to respond better to the actions and the questions I received, because like Alex kind of touched on earlier, some of the locals that I spoke to were actually really curious and they just didn't know how to ask some of these questions. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Along the lines with what Corey said, I also suggest that you research into your ethnic community abroad, because when you do feel those feelings of homesickness or just not belonging, it can really help if you know that there are people just like you wherever your host country is. And for example, for me in South Korea, I'm Filipino, and I didn't know until I got there and met other Filipino friends that they actually have a weekend Filipino food market. And I really wish I knew that they had that, because at the beginning of my time abroad for my first few months, I was really missing Filipino food and missing my family. So knowing that was a resource for me and an option just to go and also to speak Tagalog with some immigrants from the Philippines, it just really warmed my heart to know that was there for me. And I think if I had the chance to study abroad in a different country, I would definitely look into if there's like some sort of Filipino community center or another food market that I could go visit as well.
Okay, I can go next. Similar to what the others were touching on, I would say that the thing that has helped me the most in all my semesters and summers abroad is to take everything as a learning experience. In a sense, you're kind of in a classroom 24/7. You're constantly learning all the time. You're learning what to say, what to do, what not to do, what not to talk about, etc. Like just cultural faux pas, and just you're learning a lot about the place around you. And framing everything as a learning experience really helps you a lot, especially when you have embarrassing moments abroad, which by the way will probably be really funny and amazing stories when you come back home. And it honestly helps for future interactions with people from the country that you're in. So yeah, just take everything as a learning opportunity. You're learning about yourself, you're learning about the world around you, and you're basically an informal diplomat. So yeah.
I say talk about it. Like when you're facing these challenges, when you face triumphs, like talk about it. And this is coming from someone who's very bad about reflecting and very bad about talking about their own feelings. But what I found when you're abroad is when you have trusted people, trusted friends, advisors, teachers who you can talk through these emotions with. And when you're questioning what you're feeling and questioning what's happening to you, to have someone as a sounding board, as a listener to help you reflect and find those answers that you're looking for. And you might not find those answers completely, but still that process is something that is so unique in study abroad when you're in another country experiencing those things. So in addition to all of the wonderful advice, I would say just like when you're facing any challenges, don't keep it in because you're not in this alone.
Thank you, everybody. Yeah, like many of our panelists said, you may not be prepared or not know what to expect when you get abroad, but it's so important to take it all as a learning opportunity, go in with an open mind, find your community, and lean on your support network. So yeah, next is our Q&A portion. Feel free to drop any questions you may have for our panelists in the Q&A. And it looks like we already have a couple questions come in. So let's start with this question, and I'm going to direct this question towards Ramil since you've had multiple study abroad experiences. In your opinion, is there a sweet spot for how long you should go abroad? Would it be better to go for 1 quarter, for example, or 2, or a full academic year?
Well, I would really say that it depends on you and how often you want to go abroad and how it fits in your schedule. I obviously went a lot, so I made sure that I could go as many times as I wanted to. So I made sure it fitted with my majors and my schedule to graduate on time. But yeah, I would really say that start your research now and see if you want to go beyond maybe 2 quarters, maybe do a full year. I've met people who are satisfied with maybe 1 summer, maybe half a summer even. There are like a couple 4-week programs. And I've had people who studied abroad for an entire year and they got just as much away from that as well. So yeah, it just depends on you really. I know it's not the best answer in the world, it's not the most concrete one, but yeah, I would say just think about what you want to take away from a semester abroad or a summer abroad. Yeah.
I'd also add to that, checking in with your study abroad office, as well as your academic advisors who can kind of help you figure out what the best course of action might be for you. Okay. Our next question is, how do you deal with people who stereotype or come off as mean or rude? Or what would you do in a situation like that?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that question. My connection over here is not, yeah.
Yes, and this question could be directed towards any of you, whoever would like to answer. How do you deal with people who stereotype or come off as mean and rude, and what would you do in that situation?
I can answer this one since I kind of, touched on the stereotypes I faced. So I would just, go at it with an open mind as much as possible. Try not to, retaliate the anger, because honestly, that never gets you anywhere in the situation. And honestly, if they are stereotyping you and they're coming at you with all these negative stereotypes, they probably don't understand, your situation, your identity, where you're coming from. So try to explain as as calm and open-mindedly as possible. As much as you're comfortable with, if that is explaining where you're from, your family history, yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. But I just really recommend, trying to be as calm as possible, because especially when you're abroad, there's so many conflicting factors, whether that's cultural barriers or language barriers, that makes, the communication a lot harder, a lot more difficult.
Just to add to that, I would say also know when to engage and when not to engage. I will add also, as a woman abroad, if you're alone and this happens to you, maybe in some cases it would be best not to engage and not to respond. In other cases, a lot of my local friends wanted to talk about it. That's great. And they had great intentions about that too. So I think just it depends on the situation as well. But like Corey said, go into it be cool, you know, be chill, think about it with a clear and open mind, and hopefully something productive will come out of that conversation.
Thank you both. We have a few questions like this one, and any of you are free to answer. What was it like to navigate a country where you did not speak the local language, such as using a GPS or just getting around?
I can take this one. So for me, I only knew basics of Korean language when I started going abroad. And it proved to be very scary because I ended up having to go to the hospital and like the emergency room. And the doctors there did not speak enough English for us to communicate. So it was very scary. However, there are always resources for you. For example, my host university, I later found out that they offer translators to go with you for medical visits. And most people are actually very, very kind when I tried to speak Korean, even though it was really broken and American accented. And oftentimes, your best resources will be the people who are studying abroad with you, or even your teachers, or just the people you interact on your daily like academic life abroad, because not only are some of them able to speak the native language, but they're also facing the same difficult situations as you. And they might know a good navigation app for you, or they might know where some good local spots are, or just the nuances of how a language works in the country of its origin. And I think it's really, really daunting to go into a country where you don't know the language, but part of the fun is not being afraid to make those mistakes when speaking it. And it really helps push you out of your shell and help improve your language skills as well.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, our next question is, how long did it take for you to adjust to culture shock?
I could speak to this. I think one of the biggest culture shocks that I experienced was just not being with my family, who I'm usually always with, and then being, I guess, across the world from them and not having any feeling of kind of security was a culture shock for me, because I lived my life feeling like okay, and I've never been like thrown off by anything. So it was a little bit of a shock for me, but I think it took me a month coming in, which is like really long, but it depends on each person. But for me, what helped a lot with culture shock was finding ways to make London home. So like creating connections, creating friends with people who are in London, who could show me around, who could direct me to different resources that I might need. I think creating connections with people there helped a lot with the cultural shock.
Thank you, Gabby. So it looks like we are at about time. So we will conclude the panel here. I wanted to thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Nicole, Corey, Gabby, Alex, and Ramil for joining us and sharing a little bit about their study abroad experiences.